Think quickly.
One thing I've got to try and do as I do this is not be like he is, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we go.
Thanks, Mum.
Because he almost encourages the divide and sides to be taken. Seek conflict, see? Right. Because what people don't really...
Speaking about existential personality theory, it's important to place the individual in a broader context. Jung famously claimed that people didn't have ideas, that ideas had people.
Politics was really something that had always been at the base of what he was worried about. Why do people fight wars, and why are people willing to sacrifice themselves?
I've been studying authoritarianism for a very long time. It's been my life's work to inoculate people against ideological possession. It's the lesson that I try to teach people in my Maps of Meaning course. And then I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on.
I find it very interesting how it seems to have gone on a similar path
since the 1990s.
Because one main thing happens, you get drawn into the same thing. Like I had fascination with war and everything, and then
in the 1990s, but it sort of died off. But then something changed about 5 or 6 years ago. I noticed it in the speech codes and the sexual harassment codes and the idea of rape culture. And my graduate students comments that they're nervous about teaching anything that has to do with gender or biology of gender because they're afraid of the potential kickback from students, or afraid of speaking out in public about their research on political psychology and personality. It's just...
Okay, so this is such an important topic, right? And anyone watching this will probably see like it's becoming more and more like in a public consciousness, but don't realise just how deep it kind of goes. So when he's talking about all this, he really was on something. He's articulated it a lot of the time the wrong way. So that, because he's seen it as like a fight rather than let's help people understand the truth and stuff. And I've been drawn into it by events in my life, but ultimately that's why when I see the stuff on the the transgender swimmer and stuff, being afraid to talk is that it's easy for me to kind of go on there and say no, this is wrong based on science, blah blah blah. As soon as I did that, I know I'm going to get called anti-trans, but that's I can deal with it, whatever. But I can take his point. A lot of people won't. They will be afraid of how they have to talk and stuff, and that's a shame, because like it's based on an understanding of bloody science. Like anti-trans is not saying like it's not fair for so and so to compete in a sport. That's not hate. That's not saying I hate transsexuals. That's not saying people should not have a sex change or what have you. That is just simple understanding of genetic molecular science, and that it creates an uneven playing field. But here's the thing, because many minority groups have been so repressed in the past, they've had to fight for equality. And there's people throughout the last century, particularly, that did amazing things to progress things towards equality, right? But because that created this culture that we've seen at the start of this century, whereby racism and what have you has become like, and hate against like homosexuals or what have you, transgender people, has become a thing because it is out there and does happen. So because that's become so put in the public consciousness, it's very easy then for them to kind of take advantage of that and kind of say that's racist too, that's transphobic too. And this is a line that we're tipping over now, because equality was like naturally like progressing like towards genuine equality. Not there yet. We wouldn't be probably for another 100 years, but it's naturally progressing there. We're a hell of a lot closer than we were 100 years ago. And that's happened because of human psychological evolution. Look at the 1930s, right? That's less than 100 years ago. And yet back then was a time where most, like in the British, some British people included, would see certain races as being superior. Now, how far in the past does that seem? That's how much we have progressed. But ultimately, what's happening now is people think we should be where we need to go. And they're trying to force that. But in trying to force it, it's creating an enemy out of anyone who is deemed to have had privilege before. And what's going to happen is we're going to go backwards because that enemy is going to fight back. You know, that's why Jordan Peterson now, because of the pain he's felt at people like accusing him of you know, being like transphobic or whatever, racist, because he's initially tried to objectively talk. That resentment and pain he holds from them not seeing his point of view comes across in, I'm going to write books and put out videos to help males defend themselves against this. Hence creating, like enhancing the fact that that's now the enemy, okay? So it's creating these two divides again that we've just spent like the last century bringing together. Look, when I talk about the natural progression, look at what's happening with something like veganism, right? We're developing a natural empathy where not only do we care about other people as we would ourselves, or not see, you know, one race superior to another, but that empathy is even going over to how we care about animals and stuff. And is it right that humans should be dominant over animals? That shows that this is naturally progressing. And guess what? What people are more likely to make in this day and age? Jobs aren't about going to war. They're not all just about labour work now. You know, like ultimately I started in fitness. What do I do for my work now? Use this, right? When you're using this, there isn't an advantage to be a male. There isn't an advantage to be in a certain, like whether you're white, black or whatever, right? That is a massive step to improving equality. So like it will take away the privilege because in the past, it was natural that women would be repressed, for example, in the main, because we had to go off and fight wars. Physical advantage was key to survival. It's not anymore. So those who like have like more intelligence and what have you, that seem more as like attractive because that can provide a lot more. That will help survival of that person's family more so than being able to physically defend the family would. So in that natural process of evolution, we've transforming towards like that equality anyway. And therefore, like the people who have that extra empathy are likely to be the people who are reproducing. So that next generation carries it on. Unfortunately, we risk going backwards right now.
Array of details indicating that the requirement to speak in the politically correct manner is becoming overwhelming. It just so happened that it was the trans pronoun issue that brought in this restrictive legislation that had forced speech content, which I think is a very bad idea in principle. Very, very dangerous idea.
Right, he's 100% right. But as you'll see, shortly, he's going to get bits of this like wrong, and that would stem from the attacks he's had, like, as I touched on, resentment. I have found myself writing things sometimes, and as a male, say I'm talking in a hypothetical like sense, and I'm talking about psychologically and philosophy thing, whatever. So I'm related to a baby, might be writing and I find myself saying he, and I've stopped. Change it to they. Now, what happens to the creativity in that moment? It's gone because you've had to stop and think, should I say he, should I say they? That creativity's gone. Now, the thing is, we do have a lot more he when it comes to literature. That's because females were repressed for a long period of time, right? As we keep going and more, I mean, look, Jane Eyre, like, you know, the Bronte sisters, all their stuff, a lot more she and what have you, because they're female writers, it's more natural to say she, okay? Now, as like equality increases, there are more females who've obviously, right now, if you look at it, the top jobs, like universities and stuff, there's equal balance between female lecturers and males, there's equal output now in literature, male, female. Therefore, it's natural that the males will say he, the females are more likely to say she, and over time that will balance itself. Unfortunately though, and this is what's drawn me into this stuff, that video, Angry Women, where I've taken clips from the Republic of Modern Life. I'd suggest watching it. Angry Women, it's called, on YouTube, where it talks about the radical feminist groups that were set up in Leeds around the time of the Ripper. Do you know what some of them are doing? They actually would take all the books out of their house and burn them that were wrote by men. I mean, that's crazy. And incidentally, if you want to wonder why I ended up having to experience what I have, the reason I've used that video is because the people interviewed who were getting rid of all their books that were wrote by men are now our MPs in this area.
I've entitled this talk, Professor Against Political Correctness. There are continually things happening in the universities and in the broader political world that make me very nervous. It's becoming increasingly difficult for professors and students to even say what they think. And I think that some of the things that I say in my lectures now might be sufficient for me to be brought before the Ontario Human Rights Commission under their amended hate speech laws. And that scares me as well. And it scares me that I think that because it sounds paranoid. And there is a first reading of legislation in the Federal House in Canada about a bill called C-16.
And I'm very proud that on May the 17th, we introduced Bill C-16, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. The bill addresses a fundamental issue of equality and human rights, the discrimination and hate crimes experienced by trans and gender diverse Canadians.
Definition of discrimination and harassment. Now, these are truly terrifying. Discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or impact, intentional or not. Intent matters. This is a painful thing that human beings have learned. It's at the base of our modern legal systems. If I accidentally run into you, that's way different than if I run into you on purpose. And so this...
Right. I've got a note here. That's right. Because that's correct, right? That is absolutely correct. But also, are we not aware, if we know that running into someone is bad, do we not try to avoid doing it? You know, so there is that area as well. But then on the flip side, right, if you don't like being run into, maybe you don't play rugby, okay? So this is where you have to be so careful with this. It's kind of like, if you know that's offending someone, but not doing it in other situations would actually offend someone else, you will tend to go with the norm unless it's pointed out to you. So when it's pointed out to you that running into somebody hurts, you probably try not to do it. You know, otherwise it might be fun to go out on the street and see how many people you run into and knock over. But we know that it's not good, you know, or we may think, actually, if I'm going to go out for a run, I will probably do it in a park or on a road rather than going through the middle of a shopping centre. We'll try and avoid the accidents if we can.
Is designed to reverse that. So this is the scenario I've been running through my head. I can envision a student or a colleague insisting that I call them using gender-neutral pronouns. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Right, and this is a really bloody tricky one, because you should not be able to dictate the pronouns. You know, ultimately, if you're lecturing in a class and someone is a birth gender female, you naturally would call them she the first time, right? If they then point out they would prefer to be called he, you should absolutely then be calling them he. Okay? If you want to use gender neutral pronouns, it's pretty damn tricky, because otherwise they is often, depending on the, you know, what you're talking about, depending on the context. If you're talking like to them directly, what do you say? It. There needs to be like a he or she, because they doesn't always apply, like, you know, in grammatical terms. So it's being gender neutral there is very, very tricky. But if they then point out to you what they would prefer you say in that context, then you're deliberately offending them. by not taking it on. I think that's where he has the issue in that, because he has the issue with seeing how bad this can be with us having to say they when you're referring to, like, say, you write a book, you talk about hypothetical baby, you have to say they rather than being able to just naturally say what comes to your head. Woman, that's more likely to be a she. Not always, but more likely. As a man, perhaps more likely to say he. You should be allowed to do that. But because he perceives an attack there, it's almost like he's got this guard up where it's like, I'm sticking to the pronouns that I think are right, irrelevant of whether it offends the person I'm speaking to. And that's wrong.
Recognize another person's right to determine what pronouns I use to address them. I won't do it. Now, my decision might be illegal, and maybe it's even a decision.
And just to point out, that's why I said it's because most literature is wrote by men. As we get more females, because equality is developing, as we get more females releasing the literature that we have in our education system, a female will naturally say she, you know, and that's why it will evolve, and suddenly there'll be more she.
I started tweeting about it, and I made a number of comments basically calling out Peterson for being transphobic. But I just sort of felt that I could speak perhaps to having a little bit of lived experience as a non-binary and a trans person.
Transphobic, is a touchy subject. I've already just said how I disagree with Jordan Peterson on that, and you should accept the pronoun that someone wishes to go with. So this is why I'm trying to be objective. The reason I'm saying that is because if that's transphobic, right, if that's the level that we would start to construe as transphobic, then in parallel terms of racism, say, what the fuck were the Nazis doing to the Jews then? Because they weren't just calling them by a name that they didn't like. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is, it's not like saying, it's not like a deliberate, his thought process, Jordan Peterson's thought process is not like, I hate transgender people. You know, it's just like, I believe this is what should be said based on my understanding of the English language and you know, molecular human biology and stuff. Now, he may be wrong on that, as I've just kind of pointed out. If you know something's offending someone, then perhaps you should, why would you deliberately want to continue offending them? Unless you're seeing yourself now as part of an enemy and a divide's being created.
And I wanted to try to stick up for students who felt under fire from Peterson's remarks. I wrote to someone in the administration and asking, gosh, what are we going to do about this? And it sort of snowballed from there.
Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people. It's about protections for transgender people. Peterson frames this as a free speech issue. Just because you can't speak exactly what you want to say, when you want to say it, where you want to say it, doesn't mean you get to throw a big tantrum.
You've accused him of abusing students by not using the pronouns they want to be addressed by.
That's how I see it, absolutely.
That is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely. Many global documents, many
How about
organizations.
violence? Is it tantamount to violence?
Yes,
How about
absolutely.
hate speech? Is it tantamount to hate speech?
Yes, of course, it's hate speech.
Now, it's one thing to say I'm offended by that. It's another to say this is hate speech, this is abuse. And this is partly where the issue is. If this is what's being discussed openly in society, we're trying not to offend people, right? Do you not think the people speaking to them about this now have perceived, therefore, like the white male dominated society as a source of their repression and pain? And therefore they see the white male dominated society as an enemy that they need to tear down to have that equality they're looking for. Do you know what that does? It will make, firstly, as you touched on at the start, a lot of the white males afraid to even speak, for not wanting to offend people. But it makes it very, very easy under the shelter of that for the people on this side to do whatever the hell they want that is anti-white male. I'm going to give you an example because I'm living it. Alison Lowe has on her profile, she, her, right? Obviously, I'm not going to go over all the stuff that I've been through. You all know, go watch the Republic of Modern Life videos, okay? Today, and this is where things are worrying, okay? He's talked a lot about like being worried about the teaching and social sciences, i.e. things being taught from a solely feminist perspective now. And an example of that, because it doesn't happen anywhere more than Leeds University, because they've developed that into an art where they're actually going out now and doing, like tearing down a white male as part of research and then doing a painting about it. Do you know why? Because they feel female artists in the past were repressed. They, you know, Griselda Pollock in particular talks about that, you know, there's one example, I can't remember the name of the painting, but I've just gone through too much bloody research on this stuff. But like, it was originally portrayed by the person who painted the picture, right? So this is why it was studied this way in art history, because the person who painted the picture said it was like basically a prostitute and then there were men like queuing up. She's gone and completely changed the perspective of how that example was taught and saying, is it not a female who is being worshipped by the men queuing up and they're her slaves? But surely it's down to the artist's interpretation. But because for so many years females were repressed, how most of the art's done by males. But that's changing over time because of that equality improving. So therefore you get the male to paint from a male perspective, you'll have the female to paint from a female. It doesn't mean we suddenly need to force a balance, i.e., and this is, he was simply afraid of the way things are being taught, and he talks about that on other like videos and stuff. What he doesn't realise is how far that's gone, where at places like Leeds University, art history, and also Warwick, because a certain Carrie Johnson, or Simmons as she was then, went there, they're taught to go into society and do something that makes a difference politically, right? i.e. partner up with a perceived dominant alpha male, yeah, and then see if you can get them to become your slave. I'm going to be honest on something, right? Because you guys probably won't believe this. Probably all know what Kay was like me when we first got together and stuff, right? One of the things that opened my eyes to what was going on at the end and made me think, hang on, I should look what's going on here. I was sat on my bed, okay? She walked in, and she was just going to work. Knee-high boots on, low-cut top, dress on, makeup, hair done up, etc. The sort of stuff, yeah, she used to dress out if we went out or something, which stopped happening, you know? And like, I'm like, what? You know, I didn't even clock. Why is she dressed like this for work now when I never see her like that? I used to come home, I'm then running her a bath and whatever, putting her comforts on. But there was one day when she came in, was trying to get like nail varnish or something off a necklace, like pendant, threw it at me and said, you can do that. And the next thing, I'm sat there scratching this neck. And it hit me, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? You know? And that's what happened in my life over the course of a year. So when you wonder why Adam wasn't on social media and stuff all the time, it's because he wasn't Adam anymore. You know, and ultimately, I think she wasn't doing it as part of university or whatever. That's why a lot of the people like come to Leeds University, because the links between that cult, witchcraft, feminism, yeah, because of the Ripper, that's why there's a secret part of the Leeds Library that only feminists can go into. Books on feminist witchcraft and whatever. So they'll go out, and that's the first relationship I had in Leeds. A girl was studying at Leeds University, and at some point in the relationship, she even said, I'm just using you, Adam. And at the time, I thought that must be to get over her ex, whatever, but I'm alpha male, you know, I'm confident in myself that she's going to fall for me, and it won't matter. So that's what I presume she meant. I was wrong. I was a research project for a dissertation. And that's how far it's gone. And that's, what do you think is going to happen when more and more people become aware of that? That's one of the important reasons why I think I'm the one who's had to figure all this out, gone through it twice, put it all together, got all the evidence, right? Which just needs to get to someone who cares, the right person, because I hope that I can put it out objectively rather than increasing a divide, because I can also try then to put this stuff out and say why that's happening, because people don't go out and do that to other people for no reason, you know? They have to consider their emotions as to why they're doing that as well.
You all refer to.
One of the things that I studied, for example, with regards to the way events went during the Holocaust, is that we went this far. It's like, okay, no problem. Then we went this far. That was okay, no problem. It's like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. We can do that. We can go that one step further. It's like, and the funny thing too is if you draw a line in the sand, which is what I did, all hell breaks loose. Because, well, why did you draw it there? That's arbitrary. It's like, yeah, there's an element of arbitrariness to it. That's why people won't draw the line, because they don't want to take the heat for the arbitrary element, the arbitrary nature of the act. Because whatever people happen to be directly affected by that arbitrary line, they come out and say, well, you're a horrible person. It's like, yeah, oh, well, no, but I get your point. There's a demonstration plan for tomorrow. They call it a rally and teach-in. So I'm going to have to make this very straightforward and simple. I don't disbelieve in the existence of non-binary people. Okay, do you want me to say that again? Obviously, people who don't fit into standard binary categories of sexual identity, however you decide to construe that, broadly or narrowly, obviously those people exist. I never said they didn't exist, so if you're going out tomorrow to this demonstration because you want to indicate your discomfort with my disbelief in the very existence of non-binary people, you might as well just stay home.
Everyone who is here who has seen the Peterson video, I want you to raise your hand if this is the very first time that you've ever heard anything.
I'll probably have to find the video that they're referring to as well. I don't know, I've not watched a lot of this stuff. I can't read 12 Rules for Life because there's so much science that's wrong in it. Despite some of the good stuff.
The only gathering of that type in Canadian history of trans people in a public space gathering in a large number to go up to an open microphone and announce publicly their experiences. I don't think that's ever happened.
I bet it has here.
That was a huge deal to us when we put that on.
We're here today to call out Jordan B. Peterson. He feels that he...
It has happened here. If you went and looked online, looked hard enough, I can't believe I didn't. So, it has happened here because you know what? Before, just as she became deputy mayor, Alison Lowe was there, speaker, right? Do you know what she said she would do to any men who like discriminate and, in their term, transphobic? Do you know what she said at the microphone? Well, cut their balls off. But that's someone who wants equality, has no agenda against men, obviously.
The gender identities of his students, which we are here to say that he does not.
Using preferred pronouns, I don't think is a debate. It's just being respectful.
I attempted to kill myself 3 times.
See, I agree on this. Like you pointed out, this is what I prefer to be called. I mean, it's like calling someone a different bloody name, isn't it? Like, well, no, my name is this. Okay.
Horrible things.
We also told media not to film like trans people without their consent. The media was all very responsible with that and respected our wishes, but Rebel Media wouldn't, and they kept like shoving their cameras in people's faces.
Actually, I'm talking to people because I want to know whether they want a man to be fired. I want to know about Bill C-16. I want to know what they think about campus freedom. Everyone here can give their opinion on whether they think this is a campus with free speech. Anyone of any skin color or gender can give that opinion.
Or like the Lauren Southern thing was like basic definition of like trans people being talked over. She had just legally changed her sex marker as some sort of like anti-trans publicity stunt a few days before.
One more thing, for purposes of this identification, I would like to be identified as male. I brought in all of the proper documents.
I would say, if I was a professor or whatever, I would have no issue then after I'd been reminded, right, to then start using like he or whatever instead of she. That's what you prefer.
I honestly didn't expect it to be that easy.
Like, the people who were there were, like, raw that day. You know what I mean? Like, everyone who attended that rally was putting themselves in a very vulnerable position. And it was really just, like, being spat on.
I don't think you can attend a rally and create a rally and not... I mean, if you're protesting something, yes, you're protesting because there are people against it.
I think people also have to start pushing back and saying, when they hear this constant noise about what group identity you belong to, and to make that the cardinal element of their identity. It's appalling.
And there you go.
It was really good talking to you guys.
This is where, like, you can see, because he's no doubt at times got frustrated with trying to get his points across. And there's, yeah, I don't know how much more of this I'll play, guys, but like, it is on Amazon if you want to watch. Like, if you go through it, you'll see that he does get angry. You can see like his resentment coming out to those who in the past shot him down and stuff. And that's where his flaw is in this. Because sometimes even if his point should be right, okay, and as I've said going through this, is not always, right? But a lot of the time, even where his point I would agree with, he is then trying to articulate in a way through force. Whereas if I think something is a truth, I would see it as a challenge in myself to get the person who doesn't see that truth to see the truth, right? That's what Socratic debate is. Not by forcing the truth on them, right? But by explaining why, talking to them about it, so that all of a sudden either you say, actually, okay, I agree with you, or they say, okay, I agree with you. You know, there's maybe a truth, Socratic debate, and that's, you know, that's what teaching proper, like, philosophy and stuff is all about.
Okay, good, yeah, bye. Oh, who was that?
Are we recording? So
I'm probably going to leave this there,
I
don't
now,
I?
you can put out in a tweet. And
I did watch more last night. But...
All right, I'm going to be mindful of you, Marxist. I was one of Jordan's students when I was an undergrad at Harvard. He could be a pretty intimidating professor, but he was beloved.
Say the aspect of people that's divine, theoretically, is the part that stands on the border between the unknown and the known. And it moves information from unexplored territory into explored territory, expanding the dominion of the group. That's okay. Who's this?
One of the things I remember is that if any student had an objection to something, if it was clear it was from an ideological angle, whether left or right, he would just sort of scissor it. Like
and that's what I meant a moment ago. Rather than debate with them, get them to see why
part of what you're asking
wrong,
is to get information or make a power play in the phrasing of the question. That's not going to be tolerated in the kind of discourse of a classroom.
For me, ideologies are the expression, in a sense, the verbal expression of the internal structures that regulate our emotions.
Jordan and I have been in touch sort of increasingly as our lives have gone on.
Actually, I think that was really worrying me, I guess I would say, because the last thing I want to do, well, I don't know if it's the last thing, but I don't want to get into political arguments, and I don't want to get stuck in a...
I don't want to fucking get into politics. Unfortunately, when you go through experiences of life, like, you get drawn in certain things, they create values. And when you're talking about the subjects that he does, it's a bit like saying, I don't know, like, I want to be a swimmer, but I don't want to get wet. You know, you're into those things, you're going to get involved in political arguments. But I think, you know, if you watch this, and I know it comes across in a lot of his other stuff, that force to shoot down. And it takes away his objectivity, which is a shame, because he is an intelligent guy, right? But unfortunately, what happens, let's say you've got this, let's say this is a line, right? And in the middle, you've got equality, okay? Me, right? And then you objectivity as well, yeah? So then you've got like repressed, say here, right? And they're fighting for equality. And then you've got the, just here, not not knowing that they're oppressing people. Okay, so Jordan Peterson maybe when he started out. Now what happens is as we actually do get close to equality, some people will want it quicker, or those who are feeling repressed will suddenly be pushed here, start feeling more and more repressed. And then when you're here, you start acting in a way that will push where you perceive this as an enemy, right? Not just seeing that as an enemy, i.e. racism, anti-trans, you start seeing this as an enemy. So what happens is this starts to fight back, and this, without it realising, moves here, right? And that's what we risk happening. Instead of moving here, we risk going like this. And it's scary. This is like really big, important stuff going on in the world right now, and it is scary. And you know, I think to be honest, I got to around here on this, but I think the rest of it is just a lot of him like out in the street shooting people down. You know, the stuff that I've talked about. So I'm sure you've seen enough Jordan Peterson to know that sometimes he does do that, and his own emotional bias to things that's take over sometimes from his objective thought. And that's, you know, ultimately what I've been saying throughout, where he often goes wrong and stuff. But yeah, anyway, guys, I think I'll leave it there. Hope you found